What's going on, everyone? Welcome to a Friday edition of On Cue. Rich Quinones is here. We are brought to you by our good friends over at Play It Again Sports, 1450 Clements Bridge Road. They just opened up the other store in Livingston as well, and perhaps another store to follow. But don't forget, give them a call, check them out online, and you get 30% if you tell them that you heard it right here on Cue, as well as BYP in the YouTube channel, 30% off on your buys and 30% added to your buys as we welcome in our good friend Nick Costco at Nick Costco 59 College Sports on 3 Sports and the ascending voice of RU Wrestling, and of course the very popular and talented voice Cal Live Sports down here in our backyard. All right, top 25 college hoops, my friend, and we are right around that corner. Conference tournaments coming up, March Madness right around the corner. Let us start with this. I have to ask you off the top about my St. John squad. They actually got a win over a bad Georgetown team last night, almost blew a 21-something point lead, but they get set, take on Creighton. The last time they played Creighton, it kind of, started that downward spiral, 8 out of 10. They blew that big game, that huge lead to Seton Hall. And then Rick Pitino, my guy, I love Rick Pitino, you know that, comes out and says it's the most, in so many words, this is not an athletic team. What the hell did I get myself into? This is a miserable time. I'm not happy. It's not enjoyable. And it just created a firestorm. And, I'll start with this. This is Patino's team. So for him to kind of say that, I mean, is it just frustration from a Hall of Fame coach or buyer's remorse? Like, oh man, this is the hand I've been dealt. I got to deal with it.
I mean, Rich, and first of all, glad to talk to you. It's been quite a little bit. I know
Yes.
we both been very busy this winter season, but it's probably a combination of the factors you just mentioned. He's older, and he was just at Iona where he kind of got his career resurgence. We saw his run, even in our backyard in that tournament over at the at Boardwalk Hall in
Yep.
Atlantic City. So it's like when a guy like Rick Pitino takes a job at St. John's, when you're like, okay, basketball program, a lot of history, and now you bring Pitino back into the fold. He was at the peak of his powers at Kentucky and Louisville, winning titles. I know obviously a lot of controversy behind that, and it is amazing the fact that he can come out and rip his team, and yet he did get flack for it in the media, and he later did apologize to the St. John's fans on behalf of his team and to his team and whatnot. So I wouldn't call it buyer's remorse because he kind of knew what he was walking into. I know a lot of his complaints were other than the on the court performance where he's like, "Oh, this guy's slow. This guy can't move laterally." And then, of course, in his apology, he says, "Well, I look at Nikola Jokic in the NBA. He can't move laterally. He's like the slowest guy in the NBA, but he's the MVP and he won a championship." So it's like, well, I don't know what really I'm talking about here, and maybe I was just frustrated. So at 15 and 12, they're still probably around that bubble. I mean, I haven't really dove in deep to some of these bracketologies where they can kind of go all over the place. But, maybe a quick run here from St. John's. Maybe they could sneak into the NCAA tournament. So they're not out of it by any means. I think it's just, I think he's starting to realize that there's more to the bigger time college basketball coaching than there was when he was even at Iona over the last couple of years, and even
Yeah.
when he was initially at Louisville because of the new age of the NIL.
Correct.
We have name,
Transfer
image, and
port. Yep.
likeness, the transfer portal. These kids can just basically bob and weave like these coaches can. And I think he's part of the generation of coaches where they're not acclimated to that. Maybe they don't want to adapt to it, and he's kind of forced to. And it is interesting. You'd have to fact check me on this. I'm pretty sure St. John's just got a grant of like about a 7-figure grant from a very generous donor to the basketball program to help out with NIL costs, and maybe it goes towards facilities and whatnot. So maybe he's not wrong about, well, our facilities aren't what they should be compared to some of these Power 5 programs. This is a basketball, this is a historic basketball program here at St. John's. We should do better for our team, for the present and obviously the future. So I think it's a combination of factors of just saying, yeah, I'm older. I don't want to deal with this, but I have to. My frustrations got the better of me during a bad loss. They blew a big lead in that game, and obviously with Creighton around the corner, it's amazing to me that they could potentially upset Creighton this weekend, and all of a
Sure.
sudden everyone's going to forget about those comments,
Yeah.
or they're going to treat those comments like, oh, that was the turning point of St. John's season for them to get into an NCAA tournament and make maybe a bit of a run in March Madness.
Yeah, well, I mean, listen, you almost blow a 20-something lead to Georgetown. We've seen over the last several years, they're
Mhm.
horrible in Big
They
East
are.
in
Hmm.
conference play. St. John's sitting at 15 and 12 right now. Yeah, I think what bothers me is that these are still young kids, and
Right.
you can you're looking at potential recruits in the city that want to go to St. John's. But again, this is also the team. You've jettisoned players, right? You've allowed other players to come on and be part of the team. So it's the hand you've been dealt, and he's got to understand that. I've always been a Pitino fan, 100%. I think he got pressure from the university where walk back to comments a little bit, don't
Mhm.
shit, where you eat, so to speak. But again, we'll see if they get the win. You look at this weekend, you do have some good matchups, but it is interesting when you look at top 25. I mean, we certainly can sit there and agree with UConn, Houston, Purdue, Arizona. Then you got Tennessee, Iowa State. A lot of people are looking at Marquette, Duke, flipping them 7-8, Kansas
Mhm.
and North Carolina flipping them 8-9. For your estimation right now, Houston's getting ready to take on Baylor tomorrow. Houston's sitting at 23-3. Baylor's ranked 11th, 19-7. Right now, best team in the country. Is it Houston? Is it Purdue? Is it UConn?
It's hard for me to say Purdue just because they beat up on my lowly Rutgers Scarlet Knights the last night. So you look at the overall resume of UConn right now, and I know they got waxed the other night. It was an upset. Don't get me wrong,
It
but
happens.
yeah, it does happen. No one goes undefeated anymore. It's the rarest thing in the world at this point to see a college basketball team go undefeated the entire regular season, win their conference, and win the NCAA tournament. It just doesn't happen anymore.
Right.
These teams are going to slip up, and if you're UConn, you're probably going to say, well, if we slip up now, it's fine. We get the pressure off our shoulders, so to speak. It's the old cliche. It's the old adage for all sports. Where you say, well, there's the pressure of going undefeated. You get that loss out of the way, and all of a sudden it's like, okay, you could play loose again. You play free, and all of a sudden you're playing your best basketball again. So I'd probably still lean towards UConn as the best basketball team in the country. Houston's not too far behind. Purdue to me is also very solid, and I think that's your pretty much your standard top three in the country. Now, how the rankings shake out for the AP poll come Monday, as of course we'll track it on three. I don't know how they're going to shake out. I'll leave that to my colleague James Fletcher as he predicts the AP poll every weekend. Maybe they move UConn down a spot or two, but they're not going to take too much. They won't take too much out of that loss. Obviously, but I would still lean UConn. They're the defending champs. If I had to pick a champion this year right now, I'd still lean UConn to win back to back here. But I would say Houston is your solid two. Purdue, I don't trust as much because we've seen them in big spots over and over, whether they're the number one team, the number two team, or in this case, the number three team.
They're
Someone's
always
going to
good to
pick.
get bounced
Yeah,
early.
they're either going to get bounced early in the round of 32, or they get picked off in the regular season. They drop. Obviously, as a Rutgers alum, I've seen it multiple times where the Scarlet Knights have had their number. Obviously, not this week, of course, but they've had a team like that has had their number in the past before. So I'd still lean UConn or Houston, probably leaning towards the Huskies. Purdue, not a distant third, but they're in the running there. But again, until I can see them make a deeper run into the postseason on a consistent basis, where you're saying, okay, this team is not on the verge of being upset every week, then I would lean Purdue. But right now, I would still say UConn's still your best team in the country overall.
Yeah, and the way it'll shake out, I mean, obviously they should be your four top
Mm,
seeds, and most likely UConn's going to wind somewhere in the East bracket. And you look at their losses this year, right? Seton Hall, Kansas, I believe, and then they just lost to Crane. So their schedule was extremely favorable if they didn't
mm,
lose, to just basically go on a ridiculous, I think it would have been like a 13, 14, 15, it would have been like an 18 game winning streak. You want to get that loss
right.
out of the way. And I still like Houston. I like their guard play. I'm a big fan of the guard plays and the depth. Purdue, we've mentioned them for, it seems like, for so many years, as you just kind of illustrated. Marquette, Duke, Kansas, North Carolina. You start to kind of now get into the middle tier of these top 25 teams.
Hmm.
And I mean, listen, I can't sit here and tell you that I can see a Duke or a North Carolina making a deep run, but it wouldn't shock me because we've seen that before. I don't know if you think it's a little differently this year with those teams, or if it's more or less we're top heavy with three or four really great teams, and then it's kind of a mixed bag potpourri with some of those other teams.
It could be a mixed bag. I know people like to stay high on Duke, North Carolina, Kansas, the Blue Bloods, as they were still in the top 10 earlier this week, according to the AP poll. One team that I think that people are kind of glossing over, despite the fact that they're in the top five, is Tennessee. They played Missouri, and then their head coach even said, that's the best team we're going to play all year, which I found a little bit surprising. But when you have a guy like Zakai Ziegler who's going to play at such a high level for the Volunteers, when he's healthy, Rich, and if he's healthy and he's playing at the top of his game, he just elevates his entire team around him.
Yep.
That could arguably be your best team in the country when it's all said and done. Now, again, you and I do this every year. We talk about the tournament. We're like, okay, do we trust the Big Ten? Do we trust the Big 12? Not really. Do we trust the SEC? Maybe, but it's always like, do you trust Kentucky? And usually people don't trust Kentucky, and obviously they've had their ups and downs over the last 4 years as well. But Tennessee seems like that team where, like, they came up short last year, but you look at 2024, if everybody stays healthy, I think Rick Barnes and company are going to be on the up and up and maybe make a deep run into that Final Four, if not win it all this year. They definitely have a shot in my mind based on what I've seen this year, which is, I'm not in depth breaking down film in here like a guy like JJ Redick, of course, but I'm looking at this from a surface level perspective. But Duke, Kansas, and North Carolina, your regular blue bloods, they're going to be in the tournament. They're going to have their everyone's going to place their bets on saying, okay, maybe one of these guys will end up winning it all as well in March. They're your standard right now. And with the way they play, I like North Carolina. I know they've been on a little bit of a skid, but I still like those three as well. Kansas runs to me through Hunter Dickinson. He's been their most consistent player all season long. Obviously, him being a Michigan transfer, that was a big deal in the offseason when he came to the Jayhawks. But I think if the Jayhawks run through him, they're going to be out of that Duke, North Carolina, Kansas bunch. If he's playing his best basketball, that'll be your best team out of those blue bloods for sure.
Is Jarrett McCain the best freshman this year right now?
It certainly seems like it. I think he had like 36 points in the one game within the last week, and John Shire's like, oh my god,
40% from beyond the arc too.
Yeah,
I mean,
he's like, oh my god, where did this guy come from? Not where did he come from, but he's like, if he plays like that, like our team's going to be almost impossible to beat. So McCain's definitely up there. I've been really
first round.
Yeah, I would say so with the buzz he's getting right now. I mean, again, I'm no basketball expert, but I would say McCain is definitely playing at one of the highest levels in college basketball right now for sure.
Yeah, so I think a couple different places had him number 3, draft big board, probably work his way up, when it's all said and done. If you have that type of really nice run, right, we've seen over in March Madness, you got
and again, Rich, not to get too much into the weeds about the NBA draft, but I looked at a big board. Let's just say I analyzed the big board roughly about 2 weeks ago for On Three, and I'm like, there are so many international players this year. It's like, if you don't pay attention to international basketball, you're like, I'm totally lost right now. And that for me as somebody who has more of that of the college lens on and the college slant here, I'm kind of lost when it comes to all these guys who are playing in France and other places over in Europe. And you're like, are these guys that much better? Are all these 18, 19-year-olds, are they that much better playing professionally in Europe right over a guy like Jared McCain or some of the other guys that are going to go out of the draft here in 2024? To me, you hate to call it a weaker draft class, but on the surface, especially if you have the unknown of the European players, you're probably waiting for that 2025 draft class to be honest. So maybe McCain is a guy who maybe he is a really high lottery pick when it's all said and done coming out of Duke.
No, well, I just think that's what it is. I mean, you have the influx of international players that are coming out of nowhere.
And the G League, too. Don't forget the G League's really changed a lot of things over the past couple of years as well.
So I mentioned you got Houston and Baylor, Vandy and Florida. I'm trying to look here. Duke, Wake Forest, waiting for some of these updated lines. North Carolina, they're traveling in Virginia. Alabama, Kentucky, that's a nice little top 25. I think that'll be 4:00 CBS window. UConn, Villanova, growing pains, right? I mean, all those years we kind of took for granted Jay Wright and just how great of a head coach he is. And it's tough for the Nova faithful to kind of look at these 16 and 12, 17 and 13, 18 and 16 type of seasons. And this is kind of what they're going through. It is indeed a transition period.
Yeah, who knows when they're going to be back to the elite tier of college basketball. It could take a while, and it could never happen. Jay Wright was a special coach, and obviously he left at a time where right before the transfer portal and NIL really exploded. So maybe he got out at the right time. He won his 2 titles, and he was just like, you know what? I don't want to keep doing this. I have my health. I'm still relatively young by I would say general age standards at this point. Let me enjoy retirement here. He's been on TV a little bit. I know what was it a couple of years ago? It's like, should the Sixers hire Jay Wright and whatnot?
We talked about it. Yeah.
Right. And it's like, does he really want the stress of coaching anymore? Especially being he just can't coach ball anymore unless he went to the NBA, but you have to deal with professionals and whatnot, but it's a little bit different. College, you're recruiting, you're a CEO, and then, oh yeah, you have to worry about getting more money. You have to be a fundraiser. And it's like, okay, yeah, all right, go coach basketball and go win 20 plus games every year and compete for Final Fours and NCAA titles. So I don't know if Villanova's going to have the facilities or the wherewithal to even keep up with these elite programs, because we know where the money's going. And again, I know football kind of runs everything, but you do have to mention it, because when you look at the Big Ten, you look at the SEC, those are the two conferences that are going to run college sports essentially, because it goes through football. Everything else trickles down. Now, yes, basketball is a revenue generating sport for most of these Power Five institutions, but Villanova is not a Power Five institution. They're an FCS football program. So it's like, all right, where's their money coming from? It's coming from their basketball program. If you're talking about the athletic programs that generate revenue, it's their basketball program. And it's like, where else are they going to get money? They don't have TV deals.
No.
The school's not trickling down money from NBC, CBS,
Nope.
Fox, wherever
Nope.
it's coming from. So are they going to be left behind? Are there going to be some wealthy donors saying, we want to keep Villanova basketball alive within the Philadelphia space among these, great Philadelphia colleges, and then the Northeast basketball
Yeah,
scene?
Big Five.
They're going to be shut out, because I mean, I know Penn State's not a basketball school, but Penn State could essentially generate more money as a basketball program. Rutgers in New Jersey is going to do it. The Ivy Leagues are at least going to have Ivy League money. You know what I mean? So it's like, where does Villanova fit in the long term conversation? I really don't know. I think they're going to be struggling financially compared to the other teams, at least what I see on the surface. But to combat that, you just have to win. And right now, they're not doing it at the high level they were with Jay Wright.
Yeah, it's a fair point. Again, on Three Sports is Nick Costco, kind enough to join us on Q. Rich Quinones here. I look at this conference breakdown, Big 12, SEC, Big 10, might get 4 or 5 teams out of the Mountain West. And then I feel the aforementioned Big East, you're going to have it so congested, a ton of bubble teams. I mean, come tournament time, do you foresee, in years past, we would get to 6, 7, 8. Is it possible now this year you're going to get 5 or 6 teams coming out of the Big East?
I think, yeah, you're pretty much locked into UConn, Marquette, and Creighton. Seton Hall's on that bubble, and it's amazing. By the way, not that turns into a Rutgers conversation, but isn't it amazing how Rutgers beat Seton Hall at one point? Now Seton Hall is 17-9. Rutgers, if they have a miracle shot, need to go 5-0 the rest of the way, which they won't do. It's never happened. I think it's happened in like 3 decades, but it goes to show you the roller coaster of a basketball season, where a rebuilding Rutgers team beats Seton Hall. Everyone's like, oh boy, neither of these teams are going to do anything this year, because Rutgers is waiting for next year with Bailey and Harper coming in, and Seton Hall's left. What are we doing this year? Now they're 17-9. They're 4th in the standings according to the Big East standings right now. They might have a good shot to get in. I know Providence right now 18-9 overall. Resume I can't break down a resume by the analytics, and I can just give you the eye test saying UConn, Marquette, Creighton are probably all going to be in. Book it, write it in, pencil it in, use a Sharpie. Seton Hall and Providence are probably your teams that have the chance right there. Can Villanova sneak in? Yes, and I think once you get past Villanova, as you mentioned, you're probably only going about 5, 6 teams deep in the Big East, because Xavier's not going to get in. St. John's would need some sort of miracle runs, as Xavier would. Butler, Georgetown, and DePaul obviously not. DePaul and Georgetown obviously not getting in. Butler and St. John's are those other 2 teams that I mentioned before. They have the 15, 16 wins right now, so you need runs out of those teams. But Villanova probably also need a run. I think Providence is your 5th team. Seton Hall as that 4th team coming out of there. But outside of those top 3, Rich, I really couldn't tell you. I can't make any type of guarantee that the Big East might not even get more than 3 teams this year. Maybe get 4, maybe 5.
Lastly, for you right now, currently, who's the best college player?
Boy, that's really tough. I love Jared McCain.
Pardon me.
Man, and Zakai Ziegler to me is awesome. I know UConn goes pretty deep. One guy, Zach, I guess you have to say Zach.
I was about to say you're not allowed to mention. I feel like we've talked about him for 10 years.
I know we talked about him for 20 years at this point. He's going to be in the Purdue Hall of Fame after a 20-year career.
He's putting up great numbers, man. 21. I think 20,
I feel like you have to say. I feel like you have to say him. It's really tough to distinguish who's your best basketball player in college, because all these teams operate differently. Some teams go 3 deep. Other teams rely. A team like Purdue probably relies on him the most. Again, I love Ziegler from Tennessee. Houston, I've noticed, because they've hovered, because I break down our AP poll pretty much every week, after it comes out, and I kind of give a short analysis of the top 10 teams. But I look at Houston every week. This has been a top 5 team pretty much all year. And
Yeah.
LJ Cryer to me is a guy who's been so darn consistent every year. It seems like he's putting up 20 points every night. He put up over the week or last week. He put up 26 when they beat Texas. Jamal Sheed's a good counter. Is a good second man to him. So it's a nice 1-2 punch from Houston. So I'm a big LJ Cryer fan from Houston, but I mean, it's tough to say anybody but Zach E just because what he means to Purdue,
Yeah.
but I don't want to. I don't want to cop out here. Give me L.J. Cryer. I love L.J.
There you
Cryer,
go.
and I love Zakai Ziegler from Tennessee.
Yeah. 20th year of eligibility and coming back for the 21st year.
Couple COVID years, my friend. You might have a couple
Hey,
more.
I hear you, man. Uh, I was seeing it's a couple of schools in Florida. They have the guy, 11th year of eligibility. I'm like, what the hell are we doing? It's a story for another day. Nick Costco at Nick Costco 59 College Sports 4-on-3 Sports. As I mentioned, the most prominent RU wrestling voice out there, and of course in our backyard, Cal Live Sports. Give them a follow, Cal _ Live Sports. You get a week off, and then you've got the wrestling, you've got the high school stuff. I mean, you got March Madness. You got to save the voice, my friend.
I know I got a lot of stuff. I do want to give a shout out to ACC Network and ESPN's Rock Harrison. He won the National Wrestling Media Association's Broadcaster of the Year. I was named one of the 5 finalists, but I've talked to Rock before. I had him on a pod as well for On 3. He's a stand-up individual, so I wanted to give props to him as he was announced the winner for the 22-23 season. And you mentioned trying to save my voice. I do have a day off, and then Saturday, when it comes to it, February 24th, Region 7 Wrestling Finals here in New Jersey on NJ.com. Then, of course, more stuff for Cape Atlantic Live and the basketball playoffs. NJ State's next weekend, and then I think we're in the clear. I'll be traveling for On 3 to Big Tens and NCAAs for wrestling, but I think the voice can be saved after next week as we go into March finally.
All right, good, because we're going to need you here jumping on board, giving us your great insight as always. All right, my friend, enjoy the weekend. Appreciate a couple moments of your time.
I appreciate you, Rich.